Welcome, everyone, to this special book event. Solidarity is the political version of love, lessons from Jewish Anti-Zionist Organizing. My name is Avi Lewis. I'm your self-introducing host for this evening. I'm a documentary filmmaker. I'm an associate professor in geography at UBC. I'm a member of both Independent Jewish Voices and the Jewish Faculty Network. I'm promiscuous with my membership. I'm also a federal candidate in the riding of Vancouver Centre for the upcoming election. A hat I am emphatically removing right now to be your host for this very special non-partisan event. My delicious first duty is to introduce my friend and brother, teacher, and leader, the great Rueben George, who will offer us a welcome and an opening. Sundance Chief Rueben George is a member of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation and manager of the nation's Sacred Trust, that initiative of the nation to protect the Burrard Inlet, traditional to Tsleil-Waututh territory, from the impacts of the toxic TMX pipeline. Rueben has traveled the world, making alliances with Indigenous people who stand for water, land, and human rights. Rueben is also the co-founder and president of Salish Elements, which generates green hydrogen energy. Rueben is also an author. His book, It Stops Here, which was first published in 2023, now available in paperback just outside. Yes, indeed. Was a national bestseller. Rueben is a spiritual leader, as so many of us have experienced firsthand. He was adopted and made Sundance Chief by 2 Lakota families, and he is deeply involved in his Coast Salish culture and ceremony. It's my great honor to introduce Rueben George.
Thank you, brother. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I love Avi. Thank you, Avi. I love Avi. Thank you, thank you. I just came from a ceremony, a sweat ceremony, so I need to drink a lot of water. It's like a sauna for a couple hours. And, you know, I help a lot of people, and I help a lot of people just from over here. And there are a lot of people suffering and hurting. And, you know, my grandfather was born 1899, and he went to residential school in 2004. He remembers communities just wiped out completely. And he couldn't speak English, and they cut off his finger when he's 5 years old. And my mom, too, witnessed some horrible things. Little children as young as 5 years old being murdered. And the decimation of 20,000 people down to 13 wasn't that long ago. My mom's 62 out of that 13, on 188 out of that 13. And it's hard too, because the colonization that happened, I'm still dealing with effects and helping the people that are suffering at this moment, today. And I'm here because I want to help. The healing starts now, even while it's happening. When it was happening to my people, it was against the law to use those things that help the people. Our songs, our language, our culture, our spirituality, our ceremonies. It was against the law. So for generations, they are put in these places, decimated. If they lived through it, they came out traumatized. And that story I'm talking about isn't just my family, it's all the Indigenous right across Canada that are still dealing with the effects. But here we have opportunity and be allies, to be strong allies, to give support. Because one thing I believe in the ceremonies that I'm a part of, and I was here just not long ago for the Olive Tree movie. And when I met the young lady that was in the film, she said, we are the same. We are the same because when we're hurt and we're down and we're out, we get up and we do ceremony and we sing and we dance. We use that medicine to uplift each other. And I prayed all over the world in different places in the middle of the outback of Australia and South America and the jungle, Central America and Southeast Asia, Catholic, Muslim, Buddhist, Catholic, Christian. I had 12 priests in my sweat lodge not long ago. I had rabbis in the Jewish community in my sweat lodge. And when I'm here to give a welcome, it's in the welcome of those fundamental teachings of humanity, but in Koselish law, truth, family, health, and culture. You abide by those things here, and we'll welcome you into our territory. When you don't, we won't. But all these people that I pray with, their fundamental teachings are the same. And I welcome them because they work towards the thing. And when we're in ceremony, we use all the same things. It might be cedar that we burn in our ceremonies, but I see candles, our incense. There might be holy water, and we use water in our ceremonies. We use all those things, fire, earth, water, and sky. And when we use those, it brings back enlightenment. If you get an enlightenment from using those things, and then instead of dealing with that trauma, which is a spirit, I love my partner right there, Olivia. And we have a beautiful, I love you, and we have this beautiful connection. And at moments, we don't let any of our hurt and pain stand in the way of that love. That's a spirit. But two people can come together and form a spirit of trauma, and we see it happening over and over and over and over again right now in Palestine. A lot of you are traumatized because of that, and that's a spirit of trauma. And in our ceremonies, in our collective ceremonies, when we come together in a synagogue or a church or ashram or a sweat lodge or a longhouse, when we're comfortable, I do believe when we're comfortable, our spirits will expand to the size of that room and push out that trauma, that spirit of the trauma out of our room to help each other feel better. When she said we're the same when we're down and we're out and we're hurt and we're suffering, we get up and pray and we get up and sing. We get up and take care of each other. We brush each other off. And we have ceremonies for that. And we call it, we're going to brush you off with the medicine of that incense or that candle or that cedar or the sage or the sweetgrass. We use that to clean each other, to pick each other up, and let go some of that hurt and pain. I can't imagine. When my kids turned 5 years old, I couldn't imagine somebody taking my kids and not knowing if they'd come back or be murdered, like my mom witnessed of other kids being murdered. I can't imagine that. And that's somebody's child. And we're seeing that in Palestine. Kids that were born into a shitty circumstance that shouldn't be happening. But we come back, and when we see it and we feel it, we do something about it, and we pray on it. We brush each other off. When we come together in a moment like this, feel comfortable and let your spirit expand to help each other heal, to find that hope. To find that hope. I know we do that every single Sunday. We find that hope. A friend today talking about her son overdosing, her nephew went to residential school, looking for that hope and that prayer that comes from the opposite of trauma, and that's the love. And there's multiple different types of love. With fierce love, we could stand and we could send our prayers to protect, spiritually at least, those people that are suffering and to give them hope. Give them hope to have the freedom to what they deserve to do, to be on their land, where their ancestors have been for a long time, to feel that earth, and just to exist happily. That's what they deserve. That's what those people deserve. And we start today to try to do our best to help that healing by doing something, and coming here is doing something. Coming here is doing something that they deserve. They deserve love. Every single human being deserves love without having trauma infringing on it. Deserve love without hurt and pain being infringed on it. Your freedom to love somebody is infringed on. For what? But I'm here, and I'll always come for things like this to support and to help and to try to stop. I'm way over here and I feel hopeless. But at the very least, I'm going to get with my family, my community, and we're going to pray. Because as it is happening now, unlike the Indigenous here when it was against the law, but it's going to be like that there too. They're going to restrict their language. They're going to restrict their prayer. My family, they ran in the forest, in the woods, and they prayed and they hid. Quietly, they prayed to remember what we can, but we won't forget. We won't stop. We won't give up for them. We will continue to educate on the ugly, true facts of the true destruction that is causing those people. We won't stop. I won't stop because they're human beings and they deserve love. I'm lucky enough that I do. I'm lucky enough that I can here in where we live to have the freedom to do that. They deserve that. But also we could have fierce love to protect them, to shower them with love and prayer, and also do as much as we can to educate people, and do as much as we can to support their healing. The devastation to see somebody suffering, bleeding, dying, missing limbs, and all these horrible things. The healing's going to eventually have to come. And I know what it's like to help people in trauma like that. I know what it's like to have people like my own mom witness horrible things, to sit in ceremony and heal with her until she could love. And when you come to my ceremony now, because the healing my mom did, she says, call me Ta'a. When you come to ceremony, I'm grandma to all of you, to each and every one of you, and I'll love you like a grandma. That's the healing she did to open up her doors in her house and her sweat to love everybody equally. And it's going to be a long time for those people who are suffering there, and we won't forget. If it does get better, and I hope it does, and I pray it does, the healing will still have to continue. And my doors will always be open for those people and anyone else that's suffering because of things like that. So with fierce love, I dedicate myself for land, water, and human rights. And in a collective prayer, I believe in that prayer, we could accomplish so much to make sure that those people are going to be safe and they'll have the freedom to not be anything intrude on their love of what they would want to share with somebody. So I love you, all of you, my relations. I love all of you. I love each and every one of you, and we could do this. We could do this. We could help from where we're at. So on behalf of the Tsleil-Waututh Musqueam Squamish, I welcome you with those fundamental teachings of humanity that I know you would abide by today in the Coast Salish law of truth, family, health, and culture. I welcome you here to conduct your business because it's important stuff that we're going to hear today. So with love, thank you very much.
Whew. Rueben George. Thank you. Thank you for not masking the emotion and for bringing all parts of it to us here today. It is, it's not getting any easier to follow you onto a podium. It's getting harder as time goes on. I'm just reeling for a moment, and I want to let you do that too for what Rueben has just opened for us tonight. Tonight contains multitudes. It's already a spiritual gathering. It's already an act of resistance, of a collective resistance, to be here and filling this room with our collective spirit into every corner of this space and beyond. It's also a book launch and a strategy session, the marking of an historic moment, and our latest collective attempt to answer the supreme material question, what is to be done? What are we going to do? It's also, as advertised, a moment to share lessons that our very special guests have learned from a couple of decades of Jewish anti-Zionist organizing. And I think it's a little bit of maybe it's a little bit of a Jewish anti-Zionist coming out party here in Vancouver tonight. Does anyone feel that? Okay. I thought so. So while there are lots and lots of different kinds of people here tonight, this marks this gathering as one of a particular community within the movement for Palestinian liberation and in the Canadian left more generally. So what I want to do first is give you just a sense of our ambitious program for tonight. Our panel format is like a cascading water fountain in the garden, expanding and deepening as the water pours forth across its many levels. Apologies to anyone who suddenly needs to pee at the mere mention of running water. The bathrooms are out by the elevator. You know, they're by the elevator. Okay. So first I'll offer a few minutes of framing thoughts to set the context for the conversation that follows. Then I'll introduce our special guests, Rebecca and Alissa, co-authors of the book. Rebecca and Alissa will then share about 20 minutes of reflections from the terrain of the book, their experience with it, and most importantly, the extraordinary organization, Jewish Voice for Peace, which the book documents. We have issued a challenge and a plea for practical wisdom and concrete organizing lessons, and I know from speaking to them beforehand that they will not disappoint. So those of you who are engaged, we're going to go away, if not without an actual to-do list, although who knows, the night is young, with some really practical tips from the world of organizing. And, you know, JVP is like an American big sister org to independent Jewish voices here in Canada. We are eager for the strategic learnings from the inspiring and historic base building that JVP has done in the United States. We have all remember and have witnessed the extraordinary results, so many unforgettable moments of Jewish Americans standing up, sitting in, scaling the walls for justice in the last 15 months of horror and genocide in Palestine and beyond. And so tonight is our chance. That's right. That's right. So it's a very special opportunity for us here in Vancouver to hear one telling of the organizing story behind that ultimately led to those moments that we all witnessed. And then I'll introduce three more beautiful, gorgeous, perfect panelists, local leaders in the Palestine Solidarity Movement who will join Rebecca and Alissa in a cross-movement conversation, hence all the chairs. I will remain standing so that others can sit. Actually, I'm a leaner from my days at City TV. We lean, we perch. We do the one cheek perch on a desk if it's there. And then the last segment, I will pose some of your questions to the panel. They were solicited by email in advance. None of you answered the call for email questions in advance. So rather than just revoking your right, we have distributed some beautiful, soft little classic pencils and cue cards of a size that indicate the kind of succinctness that we encourage for your questions and heartfelt diatribes. Don't just write a rant and then put a question mark. If you have a comment, just write the damn comment. Do I have agreement from the panelists? Okay. So let me talk a little bit about this moment as I see it and a little bit about Jewish anti-Zionism. Despite the protestations of our opponents in the pro-Israel lobby, Zionism is not the legitimate longing of a people for a homeland. Zionism has a history as a contested ideology within the global Jewish community. In fact, my own family's political tradition, going back to the 1890s, was once locked in a battle against Zionism. My grandfather, David Lewis, who many of you know, was an early leading figure in the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation, the predecessor to, that's right, shout out for the CCF. Yeah. In our nonpartisan way. It's not a party today, right? It was, of course, the predecessor to the modern New Democratic Party of Canada. David was born into the Jewish Labor Bund, which was a socialist movement in the late 19th and early 20th century in Eastern Europe, Russia, Poland, etc. And my great-grandfather, Moshe Lodge, was a leader of the Bund in his town of Swisloch. Swisloch was a tannery town in what would now be Belarus. The Bund was a remarkable organization, and there's an incredible book coming from the punk priestess artist Molly Crabapple, who's got a forthcoming book about the history of the Bund, which we all need to learn more about. It was an organization worthy of the renaissance of interest that it now enjoys. And it was a huge influence on many of our conceptions of what is required for transformative political and social change. The Bund was a multifaceted political organization that was at once a social movement, a trade union, a political party, a cultural and artistic movement, and, oh yeah, an armed militia. In the late 19th century, Bundists were sworn political enemies of Zionists. The World Zionist Congress and the Jewish Labor Bund were launched in the same year, I think 1897. The Zionists, of course, wanted to depart the European landscape of anti-Semitism to build a Jewish state in Palestine, and Bundists disagreed vehemently. A core principle of Bundism was what they call Deutkeit, or here-ness. Some of you are familiar with this concept. The idea was that Jews have to fight for revolutionary change where we live and work and have roots. Tonight, right now. It's a vision for building power, for socialist transformation of society within the existing body politic, as part, a visibly Jewish part, but still a part of what today we would call a multiracial, multi-generational, working class movement for big, bold, progressive change. And this obviously didn't fit in at all with the vision of Zionism. There were fierce debates between the two movements, sometimes escalating to physical conflicts. We don't have those as much anymore, although some of the hotheads, well, that's why we practice de-escalation. There was even a cheeky Bundist song. Someone here could probably sing it. I will not encourage you to do so. But it was called, "Oh, You Foolish Little Zionists." And I will spare you the melancholic melody, but the key couplet goes, "You want to take us to Jerusalem so we can die as a nation. We'd rather stay in the diaspora and fight for liberation." Yeah, I've got JVP envy, okay? That's what tonight is about. So we Jewish anti-Zionists are not a majority in the Jewish landscape of Vancouver. But we are a significant and growing faction. And there is tremendous interest and appeal for the wider community in Jewish opponents to the system of apartheid and ongoing genocide perpetrated by Israel. Yeah, you can clap anytime. It's going to be a night of clapping and makes it more interactive. I think it's worth pausing briefly to acknowledge the debates about the term anti-Zionism, because I don't think it ever one term describes everyone in a room. To me, it feels fixed somehow, like a static state and not a destination or a waypoint. In fact, most Jewish people that I know are somewhere along this long arc of a journey from the Zionist propaganda and programming that they grew up on to their current state of dismay and anger at what Israel has become. The seemingly bottomless cruelty that it pours forth day after annihilatory day in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Lebanon, and beyond. But despite the utility of labels, identities are never fixed. For example, just to start with a casual example, one of the most fundamental elements of identity, and with zero apologies to certain political leaders of today, I am aware of more than 2 genders. So imagine how many different kinds of Jews I'm aware of. So part of the backdrop for tonight's event for me, and thinking of it in the continuity of struggle, we have the street movement, we have other parts of the Palestine solidarity movement here, but in terms of big public events in like a theater setting, we have this remarkable fact that we had 5 back-to-back sold-out screenings of the film Israelism in Vancouver last year. They were right all in a row. This city, Vancouver, was one of the most successful stops for that film for Israelism around the world. Something to be proud of. They were great screenings. And for me, the genius and the power of that film is that you watch people change their minds in real time. They change their identities. They make that hard journey from the founding myths of Jewish specialness and chosenness and supremacy and the racist caricatures of Palestinians and Arabs generally to the powerful contemporary politics of not in my name and never again for anyone, the destination. And there's clearly an appetite for those stories of change, for a vision that builds the largest and broadest and most welcoming on-ramp for people to enter our movement. So I like to use the term anti-Zionist Jew in this sense as a part of a dynamic, as part of a journey for so many, and one that welcomes people wherever they are along that spectrum of identity. But there is also, of course, a burning need for moral clarity. And that is absolutely a task we have to rise to at this precipice in history. I believe that Israel's genocide in Gaza is the moral crisis of our lifetime. Joining, as Rueben so powerfully articulated, the genocide here in these lands, the genocide of residential schools, of indigenous peoples across Turtle Island, which continues, as Rueben does, and works every day at the healing for the continued trauma that proceeds from that genocide. I see all of us standing hand to hand at the edge of a moral fissure that has opened up and cracked open our world. And I say that, this is the hard part, so, we haven't yet seen the worst. We have to be real about that. Yesterday, Trump spoke openly and positively about population transfer of Gazans to surrounding countries. Quote, you're talking about probably 1.5 million people and we just clean out that whole thing. International law has a name for that. It's called ethnic cleansing. It was just proposed from the highest office in the most powerful country in the world. It signals carte blanche for those extremist Jewish supremacists who dream of wiping Palestinians off the map. And with the bombing of the West Bank that accelerated this past week, the Gazification of the West Bank may already be underway. The indelible marker of the moral crisis of this moment is that cruelty is not just tolerated anymore. The prevailing political forces on our continent and in our world actively celebrate cruelty. Defiant cruelty is the hot new dance. It's a mood, it's everywhere. We can't pretend that it's not already here in Canada. It is 25% up in the polls in this country. And that brings me to my final point in sort of setting the stage for this discussion. Any strategic conversation has to begin with a frank evaluation of where we are, of what the balance of forces are, what's the landscape that we're in. What are the openings for change? What are the tactics at our disposal? What is our strategy to move the goalposts? And for Jewish anti-Zionist political organizing, I feel like we have surfaced. We are starting to see each other. The wider culture is starting to see us. But the landscape and the potential in this moment, in this place, is not particularly good. Of course, in the United States, our family and friends are at the beginning of an experiment in authoritarianism. I don't think we feel like we're there, but again, I don't want to we can't fool ourselves about how proximate it may be. And that experiment in authoritarianism, I don't know if Alissa and Rebecca are going to get into this tonight, but Jewish Voice for Peace is in the crosshairs, is the early drone targeting system of authoritarianism in the United States is locked on groups like Jewish Voice for Peace. The so-called nonprofit killer bill, expected to be passed soon in Congress, is intended to be an existential threat to the Palestine solidarity movement, including Jewish anti-Zionist groups. Here in Canada, the Trump effect is shoving our entire political and media class to the right. I don't know if you've noticed this. I told you this was the hard part. We're just going to be real here for a minute. The liberal leadership contenders are throwing the carbon tax away, throwing the change to the capital gains exemption on overboard as fast as they possibly can. Our opponents in the right-wing Israel lobby have moved quickly to reassert their own influence over school boards, municipal and provincial governments. We saw them shaken a little bit last year, but they have moved quickly to exercise their superior resources and reach and organizations to reassert control over the narrative. A narrative that is cracked, but they will never stop asserting it. And, we have our polite Trump in a t-shirt, Polyev, maintaining a dominant position ahead of the next election. So despite the stark moral clarity for everyone here, the fact is we were not able to build a big and broad enough pro-Palestine movement to stop Canada's arming of Israel, to stop Canada's political cover for Israel on the international stage, and to stop the easy, destructive, false narratives that the pro-Israel lobby has programmed our political class over decades. I think we helped shift the zeitgeist. I think we've changed the Canadian conversation about Palestine. I really do believe that's true. We've been able to name the shame of Canada's milquetoast response to the genocide. And, I'm knocking on doors every single night and talking to neighbors for months in this city, and I can tell you that huge numbers of people in our community are with us. They're not all coming to meetings, they're not all coming to protests, but they are with us on this central moral issue of our time. They're appalled and they're angry at the impunity of the death dealing that our country has helped enable. I believe this is a deeply held sentiment across Canadian society, and that is a big deal. But despite that support, despite the fact that the grinding gears of genocide have barely paused in this half-baked ceasefire, whatever it is, despite the fact that only a tiny fraction of the thousands and thousands of precious human bodies lying under the rubble have so far even been found, only a fraction, we have not yet been able to broadcast the clarion call of our Jewish values so loudly and clearly that they ring through every discussion thread in this land. We haven't been able to help build a mass movement out of our profound commitment to the sanctity of every life, to the precious, sacred nature of every single human life, especially in this moment, Palestinian human lives. So that's the task. That is the task that we have to attack with new energy, new determination, new strategy. Tonight can be the beginning of the next wave of anti-Zionist Jewish organizing within the Palestinian solidarity movement right here in Vancouver. It's got to be the beginning of the next wave. We've got to kick it off here tonight. So that's where we go from here, and what an incredible time to have two exceptionally brilliant thinkers who have been every step of the way with the movement that has so much to teach us in the United States Jewish Voice for Peace. I accept that my opening comments may have been a little bleak. I don't know why I have to do that. I feel like being real is like the precondition for a strategy conversation, because if not, we need to locate it where we are. But let's get started on the positive part of the program, shall we? I think you're ready. Okay. I took the hit. Thank you. Let me introduce you to our special guests, two people that we are so lucky to have among us tonight, Rebecca Vilkomerson and Rabbi Alissa Wise. Come on, take the stage. Let me embarrass you for just a second. Have a seat. And see their gorgeous faces while I embarrass them momentarily. Rebecca and Alissa were both staff leaders of Jewish Voice for Peace from 2010 to 2020 and continue to work for Palestinian liberation through Rebecca's work with Funding Freedom and active membership in JVP New York, and Alissa's with Rabbis for Ceasefire and membership in JVP Philly. So we got local members as well as historic leaders on stage with us tonight. And in introduction to the rest of the evening, I just want to read one quote about the book from the incredibly important Palestinian leader, a legal scholar, and one of the great commentators of our time, Noura Erakat, who said this about the book. It's very rare to have access to the internal dynamics of any political movement, more so when it's rife with internal fissures and external pressures that threaten to unravel it daily. Fun times. Solidarity as the political version of love provides that for us with biting nuance and tender self-reflection in regard to the transformation of Jewish Voice for Peace, from a local anti-occupation Jewish organization into an international anti-Zionist Jewish organization leading a revival of Jewish leftist traditions. Situating themselves both within and adjacent to the organization, Rebecca and Alissa have offered an enduring historical document for generations of anti-Zionist Jewish organizers to come. Take the stage. Thank you for coming.
Well, thank you so much. I can't say, I just already feel so profoundly moved and grateful to be here with all of you tonight. I will say we've been on the road on and off since September when the book came out, and this is absolutely the most impressive event that we've been to yet. So thank you to IJV and the Center for Muslim Studies for putting this together and for all of you for coming out. And I just did want to thank you, Ruben, for the way that you grounded us in this moment, because Alissa and I were organizing in Strategy Geeks, and we were asked when we came here tonight to talk about strategy and about tactics, which is not always, which is it's like the brass tacks, and that's the how of you do the work, but you really grounded us in the why of why we're doing the work. And that's, of course, to end the genocide and for the liberation of Palestinian people and for the liberation of all people. And you really did, I have to say, you touched on every aspect, main theme of the book about doing this work through love, about building community, about the need of spiritual succor during these times. And I think, that we're doing this work, yes, in solidarity with Palestinian people, and also for those of us who are Jewish, we're doing this in order to build on the ashes of this real rupture of a moment to build a Judaism beyond Zionism. So all that being said, I want to start with a little bit of history about JVP. We just came from a little mini tour in the Bay Area. That's where JVP was born. And I am a little embarrassed to say that I joined very close to the beginning. So I've been a member of JVP. It's crazy for me to think about it, but for almost 25 years. Yeah, no, it's crazy. And when I joined JVP during the Second Intifada, which was another moment of sort of peak Israeli violence and cruelty, and also resistance by Palestinian people, I joined because, and JVP at that time was only a Bay Area organization. JVP was the Bay Area organization. It was not a national organization. It was in those first few years that it became a national organization. And I think one thing that's interesting to think about is that it came together at a time when the left was at a very low ebb, and the Jewish left was at an even lower ebb. It really was a very, very different political time. It's a little bit hard to convey for folks who are younger, especially those who came in the last 15 months, how scary and brave, honestly, it felt just to say that we were anti-occupation. And the folks who founded JVP, I was not among them, they came from other movements. They had histories in the reproductive justice movement. They had histories in solidarity with Central America. They had histories in the anti-apartheid movement. But in this particular moment, with this particular issue, they wanted to do the work as Jews. And that was partly, again, for themselves, because they needed Jewish community, but it was also because they thought it was strategic, and it was a way that they would be able to have more impact if they spoke as Jews on this issue. And I think that's just important to think about, that positionality in any movement, because one of the things about the book is that it's not meant to be just about Palestine solidarity. It's meant to be about lessons that folks can take in any kind of movement organizing. And one of the early things that happened in JVP during that period of time in the early 2000s is that we started to have serious conversations about what we were trying to do. Were we just trying to be right, to have the correct position? Or were we really trying to change what was possible in the United States? And when I think back on it, it was like pretty grandiose of us. Like, we were just a little band of 20 volunteers in the Bay Area, and we were like, we have to change US policy. But that's the remit, that's our obligation. If we're committed to this movement, we have to actually be committed to change. And what that meant in this case is that we were committed to fundraising and to staffing and to building an infrastructure that could create a mass movement. And that's not very sexy. Yay, sexy infrastructure. It's not very sexy, it's not very cool, but it is very, very necessary. And I think Alissa and I, came to this book sort of as organizationalists. I don't know if that's really a word, but in the sense that we believe in creating containers for doing the organizing that can help our work be sustainable and ongoing, because we know the work is very much for the long term. And so it's about, yes, getting people out on the streets in peak moments like this one, but also thinking about how to sustain people's work in this movement or in any movement. And so now, having been doing this work for, over 20 years, and just thinking about the ebb and the flow, especially in this sort of tenuous, fragile, inadequate moment of ceasefire, we've been, for the last 15 months, in a moment of peak action in the United States, and from what I understand, also here in Canada. We have had tens of thousands of people out on the streets. We have had people getting arrested. We have had people coming out in droves. And that's sort of the tip of the iceberg. But underneath that, under the water, is years and years and years of working out the politics and doing leadership development and clarifying who our allies are, who we are partners to, who we're accountable to, investing in members and in creating the kind of political home that will allow everyone else to be sustained in this work. And that's the work that has to happen during the times when you may not be getting front page coverage in the New York Times for your actions, and you may not have 10,000 people around you on the streets. You might only have 20 or 50 or 100. And it's just important to keep showing up in those moments as well, in those peak moments. And so that's something I just want to say, if there's any folks here who have come into this movement in these last 15 months, to think about the ways to sustain yourselves and to stay in the work because of the importance of that long-term struggle. And I really, I thank God every day that, and we're going to talk about this a little later on, JVP going through the process of becoming an anti-Zionist organization meant that when the genocide began, we didn't have to think about or discuss or argue among ourselves about what our politics were. We were ready to hit the streets. And that was what enabled us to have such an impact early on.
Hi, everyone. It's so delightful to be here, really, truly. Is this working? Yes. Oh, okay. Oh, there. Great. Thank you to Alexis. Alexis and Sid. I see you, Sid. We were at the socialism conference with them in September, and they were like, you guys should come to Vancouver. And here we are, thanks to your vision. It's very rare that somebody says something like that at a conference and then it materializes, let alone that it materializes to something as beautiful as this. So thank you. And I just want to echo Avi's wish for us. I'm a rabbi, so I'll say blessing for us that this gathering may ignite a next level of inspiration and organizing here towards the liberation of all people. And Ruben, I also want to thank you. I took from what you said a story about healing from trauma, which honestly has been part of my trajectory in doing this work. I was raised in a very Zionist, traditional Jewish home from a family that was very traumatized by the Nazi Holocaust. And that trauma led them to believe that the only ways that Jews can find safety in the world is by isolating themselves in an ethno-state. And I believed that too, until I went to college and my world opened. And I feel like through doing this work, I'm getting to heal my ancestors by showing them that safety comes through solidarity and through multi-faith, multiracial co-liberation. Thank you, Avi, for that term. Thank you. So speaking of ancestors, one of them who's with us tonight is Melanie K. Kantrowitz. She was a Jewish lesbian writer and activist of blessed memory who said, solidarity is the political version of love. So we want to honor her memory and her work. And it's actually important to us that we decided to name the book a phrase borrowed from an ancestor, because it's really important for us to acknowledge that we are in a lineage. We are in a Jewish lineage of anti-Zionism, as Avi explained. One element of it, of the amazing Jewish Labor Bund, which is currently being resurrected in Poland, which is very exciting. And also religious anti-Zionists who understood from the beginning that this effort was a desecration of the divine name, and that a time of liberation could only come in messianic time, which means it's always on the horizon, which means we always work for it and we always yearn for it. So we wrote this book because as organizers, when we train others on organizing, we always instruct people to remember that a campaign or a project is never complete until you do an evaluation or a debrief. You have to step back and say, what did we learn? What gains did we make? What power did we build? And so even with a project as massive of growing this organization over this pivotal decade that we did, we needed to walk the walk, right? And we needed to do evaluation and debrief. And so we did that, and the result is this book that we hope people will take up and use. Each chapter ends with a set of organizing strategy questions, which our hope is that you can take your way through them and actually ask yourself the questions. And while we were writing the book, I had the chance to be coaching an organization that was founding itself in the image of JVP called Hindus for Human Rights. They saw our example and were like, wait a minute, we also need to liberate Hinduism from Hindu nationalism. And so it was also an important reminder to us that organizing's a craft, right? And these are transferable lessons to other movements. And we want this to be a source of inspiration for the Palestine Solidarity Movement and for other movements, right? Whether it's those who are organizing across race for racial justice, those who are redistributing wealth in creative and important ways, all the ways that we kind of are border crossing in the way that we do our work. So we finished writing this book in September 2023. We had no idea the world that this book was going to come into. And we delayed publishing it slightly, and Omar Barghouti and Stephanie Fox, who wrote the foreword and afterword, adapted their pieces. But we kind of kept the bulk of our text intact because this really was a lesson about a certain moment in time, right? And we couldn't really have imagined that what this book would come into. And we're still kind of feeling our way through this book tour of understanding like how it's landing, right? Because I think we're wrestling with what Avi described of coming up against the limits of the kind of power that conventional wisdom had taught us was what we needed to build in order to force change. So I think I just want to say that I want you all to take this book and take it to the next place, right? There's wisdom in it, and there's more wisdom to be had. There's more things to try, right? And I think that we're in a time where we don't know. Things are changing so rapidly, the power, the authoritarianism that's rising. So I just want to encourage everybody to have a spirit of creativity and flexibility, imagination, like it's a throw spaghetti against the wall kind of a time, because we really don't know what's going to work, right? And so we offer you this book in that spirit. And I think just to close about the why we wrote the book section is that one of the core dynamics in being a Jewish anti-Zionist is having to hold together contradiction, both and. Two things that don't match, that are always going on at the same time, such as we don't have enough power to stop this genocide, and we are actually at the most powerful and united and mobilized that we've ever been, right? And we have to let those contradictions motivate and inspire us to the next place.
So when we bring the rest of the panel up, we're going to talk about some of the really big conceptual themes, like building a political home and how we grew JVP to the left, even as we were broadening the base, and what solidarity is and what it looks like and how it's hard and how you mess it up a lot of the time when you're trying to do it. But we wanted to do a little bit of talking about brass tacks. And I really appreciate, Avi, again, your framing and the fact that this moment is a moment of strategic reassessment and that we do need to be rigorous with ourselves. And I think that's also the practice of organizing requires rigor and honesty with ourselves about what's working and not working. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about the difference between mobilizing and campaigning. And the reason that we thought it was important to talk about that right now is because we are at an inflection moment, and our assessments have changed and are changing based on what's happening externally, even since the genocide started. So Alissa and I actually co-organized that first Capitol, the DC Capitol takeover that happened just like the week after. Thank you. We are very proud of it. Yeah. We are very proud of it. And I was part of the group that organized the Grand Central action, and thank you. Very proud of that one too. And I will say, just as very much as an aside, one thing that's very beautiful about JVP and that really makes it feel like a sustaining organization for the long term is that I joined it, as I mentioned, as a very young person in the Bay Area, as a volunteer and as a volunteer leader. I spent 10 years as the executive director, and now I'm back being a member leader in New York City. And and my kids are growing up and in college. And so when you're able to build an organization that can go with you through those life cycles, I think that's like a very, very beautiful, truly grassroots kind of infrastructure that you can feel that you've built. But in any case, when we were planning that capital action, the word ceasefire, I'm sure you all remember this, was anathema. Nobody would say ceasefire. The relationships that JVP had built with incredibly difficult work over years, members of Congress were telling our political director, lose our number, we don't want to talk to you anymore. We thought we had lost decades of advancement, slow, not complete advancement, but what advancement we made, we thought we'd lost it. And And I will also say that we organized that Capitol protest out of an enormous amount of grief and terror that was very much rooted in, I think, many of our experiences of, that you mentioned, Alissa, of understanding what genocide is and what it can look like, and the deep, deep, fierce necessity to fight it with everything we've got. And it's, it's difficult to look back on that moment, because in some ways it was a more hopeful one than this one, because I think we really thought we were gonna stop it. And we didn't stop it. But what we did do was very much change the narrative. After that very first action, people, including members of Congress, started to talk about ceasefire. And those huge mobilizations made it, Jewish mobilizations made it possible and safer for other communities to come out and take those actions as well, and to create a true groundswell like we've never seen in this country in solidarity with Palestinian liberation. So that was a moment when mobilizations were the most important thing that we could do. And they were especially important to do them as Jews because of the unique place and conditions that we are in. I think at this moment, we're passing out of that mobilization moment. The impact of each individual action on the street is sort of diminishing. That's not to say we shouldn't do them, or that we can't, and we actually still do need to do them. We need to be very visible. But I think we're in a moment where we need to be thinking more about campaigns. And when I say campaigns, I mean selecting very carefully a strategic target that you can hopefully use as an illustration of your power, that you can shift the narrative through the story of the campaign, that you can use escalating tactics, that you can do political education with your members and with the public, and that ultimately that you can win a victory that will help inspire and build upon and create even bigger victories later. And some of that is starting to happen. For example, Israel bonds campaigns to try to get city municipalities and state governments to divest from Israeli bonds is, I think, a really important campaign right now. Every local group and formation, you can research your own campaign targets in your own ways and figure that out. There's no one, that's not a cookie cutter thing. You have to assess your own conditions. But I just wanted to mention two of JVP's major campaigns that I think really illustrate this point. The first big national campaign that we did was to get TIAA-CREF, which is the pension giant, to divest from companies profiting from the Israeli occupation. At that time, JVP had not endorsed the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions Call, BDS. We were practicing divestment from the occupation, and TIAA-CREF was a company that served a lot of faculty and healthcare workers and nonprofits, people who cared about the occupation and who were our base. So it was a time when JVP was just starting to experiment with base building. And so we knew that we had people all over the country like that whose investment money was in TIAA-CREF. And we also knew that TIAA-CREF called itself, it was Finance for the Greater Good. That was their slogan. They dropped it pretty early on in the campaign. That was one of our early wins. But their slogan was Finance for the Greater Good. And so we felt like we had a hook to go after them for owning stock in companies like Caterpillar, which, was manufacturing and supplying the bulldozers that had killed Rachel Corrie, that was destroying homes daily. Companies like Northrop Grumman and Boeing that were supplying the Israeli military. So that was the reason why we chose TIAA-CREF at that time. It was both a good and, we thought, movable target, but also it enabled our newly activated members all around the country to figure out ways to take action collectively, locally, at home, with their own institutions. And it was able to be, by telling the story of Caterpillar and of Northrop Grumman and of Boeing and of the other companies that were being targeted, we were able to help people understand what the occupation looked like and why we were fighting it. And in fact, we had our first victory with TIAA-CREF in that they did actually divest from Caterpillar. That was in 2011, 2011. They later reinvested after we stopped paying attention, which is another separate lesson, but we won't go into that later there about keeping the pressure up. The one other one I wanted to mention is JVP's Deadly Exchange campaign, which targeted police exchanges between the US and Israel, and in particular, the fact that the ADL, which called itself a civil rights institution, which it certainly absolutely does not deserve, but that the ADL was the one who was doing these alliances with police forces all over the country in partnership with the Israeli military, and still calling itself a civil rights institution, which when you think about it is crazy. But it felt really important to be JVP who took on the ADL. The ADL is an exceptionally powerful organization. It speaks in the names of the Jewish community. For Palestinians, for Black people, for other people of color in particular, it was very dangerous to take on the ADL. And by JVP as a Jewish organization specifically taking on the ADL, we were able to create space and change the narrative about the ADL that allowed, in the time since, many other organizations to do the same. But it felt like a very crucial strategic moment to do that work. So there's much more to say about those kinds of campaigns, but we just wanted to offer a little taste of thinking through, at a moment like this one, what is the target that you can come up with, maybe you already have. There's not only ever just one, but what is the target that you can come up with where you can make a strategic intervention based on your particular value added in your particular role in the broader movement that will help the entire movement become stronger.
So the main way that I think about organizing is that our obligation with organizing is to meet people where they are, but not leave them there. So and that looks different for different people. You meet people at every step along the spectrum, right? And so as an organizer, I want to affirm what people are showing up with, right? I know I wasn't birthed fully politically formed. I don't know about the rest of you. Maybe you were. But so it's understanding that we all have a trajectory, right? And when people show up to an action or a book talk or whatever it is, right? There's this opportunity to figure out what brought them there, and figure out what else they want to do. What skills do they have that they can bring? And that's kind of like painstaking work. Like you take a list, and then you have to have a group of people that then divvy up that list and call everybody, right? And say, so great to see you at the book event, so glad you came. We're having a membership meeting next week, right? But that's the work of organizing, right? It's relationships, and it's ensuring that there are ways that people can plug in, right? Because sometimes what happens in leftist spaces or in activist groups that I've seen is that sometimes and this is a good thing, is that there's some people that get it started and work well together, and then it's actually really hard for new people to penetrate that circle of leadership. I don't know if anybody's ever experienced that. But that isn't great for our movements, because ideally how we would be operating is that we would have what I like to think of as a ladder of engagement, and we would have people at every rung of the ladder at all times, right? It's like a constant cycle, right? So you have people on the first rung who are just observing. They follow you on social media. They haven't liked you or they don't actually hit the follow button. They just peering around, their friends do. And then they hit the like button. And then they maybe show up to the book talk. And then maybe they tell their friend about the book talk. And then they say, oh, you know what would be cool is what if we did go through those organizing strategy questions at the end of each chapter? And then they organize a space for that to happen. And then there was an idea that came out from that. And then they followed up with a couple people who had the idea. And then they got some big paper out or did a whiteboard and put out a lot of ideas. And then they called their movement partners and said, what are you all up to? What do you have organizing? What do you have going on? Then they took that into forming a kind of campaign, right? But all of those things that are happening, there's still more people coming up the ladder, right, at all times. And so when I first joined JVP's staff, we were at the beginning of the process of, we were just about to decide to take on the TIA-CREF campaign, or had just decided to take it on. And part of what we needed to do was to create ways that when new members came in, we knew what to do with them, right? Like, because part of the brutal one of the other contradictions of JVP's work has been that you could map JVP's growth to Israeli aggression, right? At every moment, that's when a whole new cohort came in, right? That was true for both of us. We both came in at the second Intifada, right? And so when that happens, you need to be prepared to bring people in and make sure that there's a role for them to play, right? So the key organizing task then for organizers is to do what we call leadership development, right? Which is the process of building people's skills, analysis, and personal practice. So one of the first things we did when I got to JVP was start to organize leadership development retreats, when we would take people to like a cozy retreat center in the woods and spend the weekend doing workshops and practicing together, and along both practicing how to have those one-to-one meetings that I just described and talking about political analysis and theory, right? And building community, just like being together, right? And learn and building relationships, right? So that's the work of meeting people where they are, but not leaving them there, right? And continuing to challenge people to who a person at first might say, I'm never gonna, speak to the press, that's too scary for me. But then you do a spokesperson training, and then they maybe feel a little bit different about it, and they know they have a story to tell, and then they do it. Like, organizing should push all of us out of our comfort zones, right? I feel like that's the not leaving people there, is we all need to be pushed out of what we think is we can do, right? And that's like the beautiful thing that organizing does for people. That's what keeps people in it, is you get to be more of yourself. You get to be a different version of yourself. You get to surprise yourself, right? So, that kind of work is really essential for, especially in this moment, as Rebecca was saying, moving from the mobilizing moment to the organizing moment, right? That's what we have to do, is like the 10,000, I'm worried about what happens with those tens of thousands of people that were on the street. Like, are they plugged into organization? Are they gonna keep growing with us? So I offer that as to kind of think about how you have those kind of infrastructures in place, or you don't, or how you can scale them up. And hopefully the book will be a resource for you all to figure out how to grow in that.
All right, round one. Boy, thanks for pouring on the practical tips. That was really needed. I had 9 good ideas that I didn't write down. People are scribbling. I see people scribbling. Good. Lovely panelists, why don't you take your seats, and I'll introduce you as you come. So go ahead, grab a seat, grab a mic. Welcome, Beth, Gita, and Stephen. So first, Beth Carlson Molina is a pastor of Christians for a Free Palestine. Beth grew up as a Baptist pastor's kid in Saskatoon. How many other people can say that here? And now lives with her co-pastors, lives with her wife Danis on unceded Coast Salish land, known as this place of Vancouver. Beth co-pastors an independent church called Open Way that she helped start up 7 years ago. She and Dennis also recently launched Pride and Joy Ceremonies, where she can expand her beloved side gig, creating and hosting weddings and rituals to mark milestones in people's lives. Welcome, Beth. Gita Musleh from Free Palestine Tri-Cities. Hi, Gita. A lot of people here already know Gita. Gita is a Palestinian Canadian who grew up in Bethlehem in Palestine. Gita lived through the first and second Intifada, working in Palestine as a music curriculum developer. This enabled her to witness how music helped elementary school kids, as well as their teachers across the West Bank, to process the never-processed trauma that they experienced. Jida is one of the organizers of Free Palestine Tri-Cities and the coordinator of the Apartheid-Free Communities VC Caucus, a new initiative we're going to hear lots more about. Jida is working on a book chronicling life under occupation. Welcome, Jida. And Stephen Aberley, also known to many of us here as a repeat offender at many IJV events. Stephen's been involved with global struggles for peace, justice, and freedom for as long as he can remember, which is a long time, back to the Civil War, the anti-war and civil rights movement of the 60s, up to the anti-apartheid and environmental movements of later decades, and finally to the early 90s, thanks to the patient coaxing of friends, teachers, and allies, Stephen entered the struggle for Palestinian human rights, self-determination, and liberation. I'm going to read this because it's great. He takes two verses from Tractate Pirkei Avot, Chapters of the Sages, as his political maxims. Hillel's teaching, what is hateful to you, do not do to another, which seems reasonable, does it not? And Rabbi Tarfon's dictum, you are not required to complete the task, but neither are you free to neglect it. Lessons for Living from Stephen Aberley. So the way this section is going to work, I promise you've never experienced this before. Rebecca and Alissa are going to steer this panel conversation and involve the panelists and weave them into the fabric of the work and the themes ahead of us. So go ahead, take it back. I'll stay here and sort of loom.
Okay, so the first bit of text I'm going to read is from the first chapter on building political home. Even as JVP was being denounced from all sides in the Jewish community, the ironic truth has always been that JVP has brought people back into Jewish community or helped them find Jewish community for the first time. We knew that many of our members not only wanted to speak out against Israeli apartheid, but also wanted to do it in a Jewish context rather than abandoning their identity in despair. As one participant in our 2015 national membership meeting wrote, as quoted in the foreword, for 3 days I was immersed in a Jewish community unlike I have ever been a part of, one rooted in justice that welcomed all of me. It's relatively unusual for people to be willing or able to give up familial and communal comforts in order to live in alignment with their values. It is especially important, no matter the cultural entry point for your organizing, to create opportunities to engage in and continue that culture and participation in communal life for those that do make that choice. These opportunities are the threads that tie us to each other and offer a glimpse into the future we are building. For those of us that refuse to check our politics at the door when we try to be part of legacy Jewish institutions, it's emotionally impossible to sit through a Rosh Hashanah service, one of the holiest days of the Jewish year, when an Israeli flag is positioned on the bima, or stage right next to the rabbi. A former JVP board president left his synagogue when, in the throes of the 2006 Israeli attack on Lebanon, his liberal synagogue had a video on their website's homepage of Israeli soldiers petting kittens. An invitation to a Yom HaAtzmaut, Israeli Independence Day event from the local JCC stings, as it shows a callous disregard for the pain of that day for Palestinians who commemorate it as the Nakba. So recreating acts of care and rituals signals welcome and homecoming for those who love being Jewish, seek to mark time in sync with Jewish tradition, and continue the sacred obligation to evolve and nurture Jewish culture without sacrificing our deeply held and Jewishly rooted commitment to Palestinian freedom. So Beth, I'd love to ask you your experience and practices of building political home.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for having me here. I have so much respect for the people up here and for Chief Rueben who opened us up. People have been working for decades at this, and I'm 2 years in, y'all. I learned about really what was happening in Palestine, had a bit of an awakening around that just, 2 years ago, thanks to someone in my church, and have only been organizing with Christians for 14 months. I didn't even know what an anti-Zionist Jew was until I was at an action with Omri and some others here in the room, and we were making noise outside of a restaurant that our finance minister was visiting, and I learned all the chants. I learned the chants that I would have to use at many rallies to come from those folks. So I'm grateful for their trust and their welcome. And not long after that, one of my friends who is a Christian just gathered 6 of us on Zoom whom she had seen posting Instagram posts about this and said, maybe we should organize something. So we were pastors, Palestinian Christians, Christian organizers. And by the end of that Zoom call, we were Christians for a free Palestine. So we're young, we're tiny. We had to do deep dive in learning about Christian Zionism, learning about how there are, by some counts, 30 times as many Christian Zionists as there are Jews in the world. So the power that's held, and learn the awful history of Christians not only perpetuating anti-Semitism as well as Islamophobia, but now also Christian Zionism, which is affecting so many people and really core to the power and the money that's flowing toward this genocide. So we're 1 year in, and it's so inspiring to read this book and to learn about how y'all went from such a local thing to such a huge thing, and it really, I've underlined the heck out of this, and it's such a gift to pick up all your tips. And I say all of this just to say, thank you for inviting me as a young one, as a newbie in this. And if you out there, if some of you are feeling like, you're just waking up, you're just finding courage, figuring out where your political home is, I guess if I belong here, then you do too. So that's really great. This chapter on building a political home was my favorite, so I'm grateful to speak to it. And those of us who are organizing within faith groups, within cultural groups, I think this chapter is kind of like, it's not just about, well, I'm a Christian, so I should organize with other Christians. It's about how do we actually integrate our political and our spiritual and our cultural lives and selves, like find that integration, right? And so as a pastor, as a queer pastor who's experienced exclusion within my own communities, it's so core for me to build that kind of space of belonging for others who felt that exclusion. And so organizing around our community rituals, our seasons, our practices, our prayers, and our symbols, not just as political stunts, as I think you said so well, but to kind of reclaim them and reinterpret them and breathe new life in them and be sustained by them to find that catharsis. So I really identified with that. I also loved your acknowledgement of how messy that can be, because some of us have endured a lot of spiritual trauma, and some of us have pain tied up in some of those very practices and prayers and songs, myself included. So about making permission and invitation and fluid boundaries and just letting people engage at their own pace. The brand of Christianity I'm from is not as symbol rich or as season rich as some others, a little white evangelical heritage over here. In fact, we even tried to forbid other people groups and cultures and faiths from practicing their own, and appropriated plenty of Jewish ones. So we have a lot of repair to do, but we've got Christmas and Easter. We got those ones. So our first action at Christians for a Free Palestine was a ceasefire caroling event in December 2023 outside of Indigo Books. And, taking these carols that have meant so much to us and writing new lyrics for them and just singing them to anyone who was walking by, which we got to repeat this Christmas. Gita was there. And then Easter, we did some pilgrimages leading up to Easter during the season of Lent. And that was very meaningful to be able to bring into the public eye the fact that there isn't, again, this Christian unified voice on this. There are people who want to resist this. And we've been doing these weekly Thursday night prayer vigils as well. Israel every Thursday for 14 months on Zoom, just a half an hour of song and poetry and silence, borrowing prayers from rabbis for ceasefire, prayers from Sabeel, from Christians in Palestine. And I will say it's such an advantage to have such a rich tradition of Christianity in Palestine, such a long tradition, and so many people we can listen to and follow the lead of within that tradition of Palestinian Christianity. And I'll just close by saying, personally, I'm finding such a sense of belonging and home in the interfaith spaces we've got here in Vancouver, in the partnerships that are building, between Christians and Jewish people and Muslim people and people of other faiths and no faith. I just feel like this broad sense of belonging that we're building is mitigating against the fracturing that can so often happen on the left, especially the purity culture that for some reason is coming in, just like in my church. But, you know, we can belong to one another. We can fall in love with each other's practices and values, and that's what's been happening for me over the last 15 months. So thank you again for having me.
That's so beautiful. Thank you, Beth. The next passage that I'm going to read is about solidarity. Solidarity is full of contradictions. During our time at JVP, those contradictions included being rejected from Jewish communities we grew up in, but also through force of will, making it possible to build new communities that match our values and vision for a Judaism beyond Zionism. It meant finding a community as Jewish anti-Zionists because of the brutality Palestinians face. It's about organizing toward an end of forced exile for Palestinians, even as we embrace diaspora for ourselves. Through our organizing, we have found meaning and satisfaction in this work, but have also tapped into painful levels of despair. Solidarity requires that we know who we are, what we believe, where we come from, and where we want to see ourselves go, all while not being so rigid that we can't be influenced and even transformed by those with whom we struggle alongside. Building enough power to force change starts from this commitment. Our time at JVP taught us that the daily work of solidarity is a practice. You learning as you go. You make mistakes. You fall short. You get distracted. You reflect. You learn. You repair. You reassess. You make strides. You level up. The practice involves being attentive to the visions and demands of the people with whom you are in solidarity, while carving out roles that allow you to bring your strengths to growing and sustaining the movement broadly, and not neglecting impacts on your own community. It includes flanking those being targeted, organizing those you have unique access to, designing strategic campaigns, and integrating your own sense of stake in the issue you are organizing around into your programs. Solidarity isn't about being neutral, unfeeling, or deferring to others without hesitation. It instead requires that we bring our full selves to the work of movement building and freedom fighting. Solidarity means knowing there will be personal costs and risks involved. Solidarity means feeling the pain of the struggle, but also the joy. So Jida, we were hoping you could reflect on this passage, maybe how you've experienced solidarity in the last 15 months or before, how you'd like to experience it, and what it means to you.
Sure, thank you, Rebecca. I first have to say that I don't take it for granted what you did. Like, it's an exceptional work. As Palestinians, it's the natural thing to be with the cause. But for you, you go against a flaw, a very strong one. So thank you. Many highlights from what you read, Rebecca, but the most one that stood out for me was Judaism beyond Zionism. And as I'm reading this part of the book, many things came to mind, and I like my thoughts were, you're not only trying to liberate people of Palestine and trying to liberate Judaism from Zionism, but also you're liberating all our belief systems. Religions and all belief systems initially existed to have this relationship with this higher power, whether you want to call it Elohim or Jehovah or Allah or God or the universe, and our relationships with the other human beings. And the way how the religion was used or misused is alarming, to say the least. I am sure that here in this room there are people who follow different religions or belief systems, and even if you say you don't believe in anything, that's also a belief system. And I don't like, but what matters really is the humanity in your heart. And like these belief systems and these religions, if they have to do anything, is just to reinforce this humanity. And I think you did that really well in your work, Rebecca and Alissa. And you brought religion back like to what it's supposed to be. And I so cherish that, like I so appreciate it. In the past 15 months, I met with so many amazing people, many of whom are here in this room. But I also met with people who were too religious to acknowledge humanity. They couldn't see it at all. And before these 15 months, I thought religion and belief systems and humanity walk hand in hand. I was mistaken. It's not the case. We can't assume that. And no matter what your belief system or what you follow here in this room, I ask you to take a moment to see like where this belief system is leading you. Is it leading you to this solidarity work, or is it not? If a genocide and seeing people being burnt alive and buried alive doesn't move us, like what's our religion? What are our belief systems about? And if our humanity is not moved by what we saw in the past 15 months, I think we need to check what we follow, the belief systems we follow, or our interpretations for it. And this thank you. I would love to envision a world that your work, Rebecca and Alissa, is not the exception that we're celebrating here. This should be the norm. And I really hope that one day we will reach this stage to see that this is the norm. We shouldn't be here on stage celebrating this exceptional work as the exception. How solidarity looked like in the past 15 months. We saw, as was mentioned, tens of thousands on the streets. And now, like, I think we have a similar experience. And Rebecca, you touched on that it's shifting. The energy is shifting from the streets to campaigns and initiatives. And one of the things that we're working hard on, like, it started in 2022. It's called the Apartheid Free Communities Initiative. I know some of you have heard about it. It's an initiative to take a pledge online, and it's, first of all, like, it was inspired by dismantling the apartheid regime in South Africa. And of course, it took the whole universe, the whole world to dismantle this apartheid regime. And it set a precedent, and we can do it again to dismantle the apartheid in Palestine. So the campaign was launched or relaunched last month, and so far we have 32 communities who signed the pledge here in Canada. Most of them are in BC. Kudos to BC. And there are 46 communities around the world who signed the pledge. 20 countries are involved. And we encourage you, if you belong to any community, whether it was a religious or non-religious, it could be a business or NGO or a neighborhood group or even a student group or like whatever, like you don't have to be registered in the system. You just take the pledge. They don't ask for any personal information, just to affirm that what Israel is committing against people of Palestine is apartheid, which is not a personal opinion. It has been proven by Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, United Nations, B'Tselem, Al-Haq, and many other organizations. We're affirming that it is apartheid, and we oppose this system, and we pledge to stand by the people of Palestine. And you want to think, like, envision yourself 20 years ahead from now and thinking that you did something about it. You knew about it. You can't really say that you did not know. And the whole idea is getting as many communities as possible to sign the pledge, because every community represents an amount of people, and at certain point, like if we get so many communities to sign the pledge, the government cannot really keep ignoring us. So it's applying the pressure upwards from grassroots. It's a grassroots movement. So you can visit the, Alexis, are there cards outside? Slides at the end, okay. So you could visit the website apartheid-free.org, or if you want something local, we started an Instagram account. It's Apartheid Free Communities BC. Follow our Instagram account. You could message us if you want any of us. Like, we have a whole team dedicated to that. Many of them are here in this room. I can see them. Like, if you want to organize a presentation, one of us could come and speak to your organization about it or your community about it, and you decide whether to take the pledge or not. I will answer all your questions. And let's see, the beginning of dismantling the apartheid system this year. And things I would love to see, what things we could make better. Couple of things come to mind. The unity. I can't stress enough how important the unity is within the movement. And none of us in the movement was trained to be an activist, but in the past 15 months we were thrown into this, and we have different skill sets. We have, like, different life experiences, and yes, hiccups happen. And speaking of home, like, for me, like, I struggled with the political home concept, because to me, as a Palestinian here, I have been in Canada since 2008. For the first time, I feel home. And it's not connected to the land specifically, like, it's connected to the community that was built, and that's huge to me. And even my sense of identity, like, out of this home, like, it's for the first time I feel it's nice and strong. Like, I mentioned yesterday, like, when we came here 2008, people, when they ask where are you from, I say Palestine. They even never heard of the word Palestine. They're also Pakistan, and I started telling them I'm from Mesopotamia. So and the unity I'm thinking of also is not only within the movement, but also with other solidarity movements. Black Lives Matter, people who care for Congo, Sudan, whatever is happening in Ethiopia, Eritrea, we're all faces, different faces to the same coin that really centers humanity and human dignity. And in the past 15 months, the events were too traumatic, and the intensity and, like, the frequency, like, we couldn't see all of these movements. We were aware of them. It's not that we ignored them or, like, we did not think that they are important. We knew they were important, but there was not enough work to connect to all these solidarity movements around the world. And I think I would love to see that happen.
So the next piece is from the section of the book that we call Growing While Sharpening, which is something we're the most proud about of our time there, that as JVP grew in size and power, we didn't just tread water there, we kept pushing the politics leftward. The story of how JVP came to make the decision to endorse the BDS call is emblematic of one of the elements of our time at JVP. Even as we grew larger, we continued to challenge ourselves to sharpen our politics. We continued to evolve our understanding of the Palestinian freedom struggle, our responsibilities to it, and our role in moving it forward, even in the face of harsh opposition. We are particularly proud that JVP was able to make a significant and risky political shift without the organization falling apart, even as there were significant political differences in our membership. This achievement flies in the face of the conventional wisdom that in order to grow, organizations must move to the center. Yeah. The process and outcome of the BDS decision became a roadmap for how we would make political decisions that had internal and external consequences. We want to pull out the strands of what worked and what was challenging in those moments, because these kinds of inflection points face every movement and movement organization. As organizations and movements grow, the cost of making these decisions can also appear to grow. The bigger the ship, the more energy required to turn it. Consequences can include the potential to lose members, funding, and the ability to speak to a wider community. But it's also important to remember that the cost of not shifting can have equivalent consequences, leaving you behind the political winds, alienating portions of your base and your closest allies, and losing the possibility of bringing in new members. In fact, if our politics hadn't evolved, it would have been a worrisome sign that they may have stagnated or dulled. There are a lot of lures to maintain the status quo, whether overtly from foundations or major donors whose support may hang in the balance, or indirectly from reluctance of the board or staff leadership of the organization to invite drama and agita into the organization. It's important to remember that growth is not for its own sake. It's to build power to keep pushing. Sharpening your politics, including by moving them leftward and more in line with the demands and aspirations of directly impacted communities, is a manifestation of political courage. So, Stephen, it's your turn to respond to that and the work of IJV.
Wow. Okay. Well, to begin with, you may have noticed, and if my memory still serves, I think Avi may have alluded to this, I am the old guy up here. And one of the things that has been, that I've really noticed with gratitude and humility over the past months and years is the growth of people 20 and 30 and 40 years younger than I am in our movement and their assumption of organizing and power. Bless them. It's kind of like, thanks. It's a little bit like living in a multi-generational home and suddenly one day waking up out of your doze to realize that the hub of activity and decision-making has shifted from your rocking chair to somewhere else in the house. May that process continue. So, reflecting on this moment that we're in now, what Avi called the central moral issue of our time. On the continuum of the old saw, you know, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you. We are definitely in the then they fight you moment. And boy, oh boy, are they fighting. So we need to keep our eyes on the prize. We need to take the next step. We need to listen to the advice of poet Aurora Levins Morales when she says, "Imagine winning. That is your task." So we need to be specific about what winning does, and we need to be specific about the steps that we take in order to accomplish that winning. Now, we can be, and we sometimes have been, and we sometimes are, nimble in responding to events. I think sometimes we can be nimbler, and that's something that we need to work on. We do our best work, I think, as an organization and as a movement when we are able to set the agenda, to be proactive instead of strictly reactive. So we need to not play catch up, we need to be in the lead. In order to do that, I think that we, in my organization, in Independent Jewish Voices, and this is a personal opinion, I'm not speaking as I am a member, but I'm speaking as myself. I think that we need to take the lessons from your book. We need to study your book, do the homework at the end of each chapter, answer all of those questions for ourselves, and we need to start being more intentional in our work. We need to do the homework, and we need to start focusing more on a word that's been used a few times tonight that I'm in love with, co-liberation. We need to be working to liberate each other and see how that liberation of each other becomes the liberation of ourselves. We need to be doing better solidarity work. And by that I mean more coordinated, more cooperative, more connected solidarity work with the communities that we are trying to work side by side with. Thinking about your question about home, there's the old saying, home is where the heart is. Well, for a lot of us in IJV, our work is mostly traditional political organizing and advocacy work. So in that way, our home is not where our heart is. Our home is where our head is. This is important. We need to use our heads, but I feel like we need to get out of our heads a little bit and more into our hearts, our souls, and our spirits. And your book delves into that so beautifully and so deeply. I think we can take those lessons and run with them and bring more grief, more rage, and more joy to the work that we're doing. So to think about a specific instance and issue, only fairly recently did IJV Canada declare ourselves to be an anti-Zionist organization. That took agonizing internal, well, the word that sprang to mind there for just a second before I slapped it down was bickering. But it took a lot of soul searching. It also took a lot of very patient and sometimes impatient pressure from our allies elsewhere in the movement. And I'm interested in your discussion about your BDS, your adoption of BDS, about how it was important for you not getting out ahead of where our members are ready to go. Well, the initiative for us to declare, for IJV to declare as anti-Zionist, actually came from our members. And it was pressure from our members and from specific chapters across the country that finally persuaded the steering committee and many of the leadership team were cautious, and so we took a long time to come around to that point of view. But the adamant insistence from our chapters, and then finally the horror of the genocide that continues to be inflicted upon the Palestinian people, finally pushed us into making, into the steering committee, making an emergency declaration that, after these years of process and governance techniques and members' resolutions at annual general meetings and study groups and study sessions, there was a particular afternoon meeting of the steering committee when we said, we've got to, and the person who said it was a person who up until that point had categorized themselves as a progressive Zionist. And that person said, no, it's done. We have to take this step, and we have to do it now, and we can't wait for this, for the study cycle that we initiated to be completed. We have to make this declaration, and we did, to be ratified at a subsequent annual general meeting by a vote of the majority of the membership. And in fact, there were 2 resolutions at that annual general meeting, both of which passed, and which we are able to put into motion. I have to get back into my head here. So after all of that agonizing, after all of that sometimes fractious and sometimes complicated process, we took that step, and the sky did not fall. And in fact, the huge majority of our membership was overjoyed and expressed their great gratitude and joy at this decision that we had finally taken. So we can be brave, we can be out, we can be bolder, we can move quicker, we can act with fierce love. That is the one thing I'm really going to take away from me tonight, Ruben, thank you, is acting with fierce love. And when we do those things, the people around us hustle to catch up with us, and the people who aren't yet sure where they are start to ask us questions. People come up to me, and because they know I'm a member of IJV, and because IJV has publicly declared that it's anti-Zionist, they know, well, I can ask that guy about what this anti-Zionism thing means to him and how he got there, what that journey was. So we need to bring that journey to the rest of the world, and those of us who are Jews, to the rest of our community. Now, I talked about the joy and welcome within our membership of our taking the anti-Zionist position. There has been a certain hesitancy among some of our allies in the Palestine Solidarity Movement to celebrate that declaration, because we need to demonstrate that it's for real. And we need to do that by the kind of careful, intentional, and well-coordinated and well-crafted solidarity that I've been talking about. We need to win back faith and trust and belief in our commitment to human rights and freedom, liberation, and an end to genocide and apartheid in Palestine. And I'll close with something that struck me as I looked at my email earlier today. It's something that connects with Jita's comment about unity and about unifying across movements. So what I saw in my email was that there's a certain Reform Jewish synagogue in our city that is hosting a meeting with conservative leader, crypto-fascist, and possibly next Prime Minister of Canada, Pierre Poilievre, who has, you have probably seen, scrambled to climb aboard the Trump anti-trans rhetoric train. Well, so we need to be clear in our repudiating of this kind of rhetoric, and we need to be a place of safety for folks who are threatened by that. And I say that not just as a specific instance, but as an example of all of the kind of cross-movement and cross-society and cross-cultural mutual co-liberative organizing that all of this group has been talking about all evening. And I think I will leave it there.
Stephen.
We have one more little piece of text we want to read and get a response from. Avi, I want to invite you to take your moderator hat off and put your panelist hat on. Do you want to switch seats? No. Okay. So I have one more very short piece of text here about matching strategies to relative power. A lesson that we learned collectively as we were growing was that we had to match our strategies and tactics to our relative power. There is no use in making, quote, demands that we did not have the power to compel our target to respond to. That required being realistic about how much actual power we had and, digging even further back, talking about power at all. The discussion of power and power building can be a fragile one in left movement spaces. Leftists tend to be wary of the idea of power, which corrupts, which needs to be bent towards justice, which historically has abused dissenters and oppressed the weak. Yet movements that take change seriously need to engage seriously in theories of power building. And as labor organizer and writer Daisy Pitkin has noted, power has many different forms. While we reject authoritarian power by force, we rejoice in power built through solidarity. While often associated with oppression, power can also be liberatory if used in the pursuit of meeting the needs of marginalized people. Unions and other membership-building organizations have always done this. So Avi, I wanted, as someone who's sort of engaging in that challenging work of thinking about, converting grassroots energy and power to electoral power, and what that looks like in its messy realness. Would just love to hear you reflect on that passage.
This is such a wise part of the book, and I think is so many of the themes are so tightly braided together, like getting out of our comfort zone, finding a political home, being real about where we can exercise power. I think this is a place where Canada and the United States has some significant differences. And I think in the United States, I believe there's a more mature relationship between inside and outside forces. That in part because of your two-party system, you have social movements that have for a long time negotiated with electoral power and tried to sway it. Knowing that they can't take power as social movements has made it sometimes too transactional, but like there is, JVP has a political director, the Sunrise Movement has a lobbying arm. These are not things that you see as much in Canada, in part because we have a third party, we actually have a fourth party and a fifth party. But there have been breakthroughs electorally in Canada, like our universal healthcare system, that came through social movement, electoral, mergers, unions, that haven't existed for a long time. And so we have a lot of what I think of as pretty unsophisticated relationships between inside and outside. We have social movements that throw a good person into the electoral system once in a while and then shit on them from a great height when they don't take the right position. And we have political parties who see movements as unruly crazies that need to be managed, stage managed. I'm not talking about anything specific, so you just draw your own conclusions. But no, that there's a kind of condescension from the political class towards social movements and not a spirit even of transactional negotiating. And so I just feel like in a process of trying to evaluate where we are with our position in society, with our skill set, all the basic organizing questions, what am I good at? Obviously not Instagram, you know, where do I sit in the world of things? There's actually a number of people coming out of social movements in this most recent generation going into the electoral system and trying to build ongoing relationships of accountability to the outside and maintaining them between elections, maintaining them after elections, to whether losing or winning. And I think it's really relevant for the Palestine movement. And it really speaks to this political moment when we're kind of at a lull in the street movement, when we're at this moment of reckoning and the kind of, you know, there's a bit of a, you know, roadrunner over the wheels are still moving, we haven't fallen yet, maybe, or maybe we're in descent. But there is an election coming. And there was in Canada a very different dynamic, I think, from the United States, where you guys in JVP were ready for prime time when October 7th happened. In Canada, there was a street movement that self-assembled very quickly in every city. And then there were a few organizers, and I know a handful of them that started this electoral front right at the beginning. Do you all remember that wave of MP office occupations? So that was a project of a number of organizers from across the land. I know of a few of them. One was a climate justice organizer, one was a migrant rights organizer, another worked at the intersection of trade unions and climate. And they got together and said, okay, we need some Google Docs right now. And, you know, like we need like a distributed self-organizing principle that can actually target the electoral sphere. And they identified ridings where the Liberal Party had won by fewer than 1,000, like traditional techniques around where is a specific electoral district in which to occupy an office, build a local movement. We have Van Grand for Palestine here in Vancouver. It's one of the most sophisticated electoral social movements I've ever seen. I witnessed a sitting MP, two sitting MPs at a town hall called by a Palestine movement organization who sat in the front row and were lectured by the movement for like 2 hours, including a PowerPoint presentation that was a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, where the movement folks explained very politely, and there was like a lot of discipline and like good practice, the strengths that these MPs had if they did the right thing and actually started speaking publicly the way they did in private meetings, you know, the opportunities they had to have all these people work for them to get reelected if they got on the right side of history, and the threat that everybody here was going to work to defeat them in the next election if they didn't get off their asses and do the right thing. And that's something that not everybody has, right? This movement has been burbling along. It has produced candidates coming out of the movement who are running for federal office in this election in the spring. That's amazing. I'm not the only one. There are many. And many of them have come right out of Palestine organizing. There's an incredible candidate in the riding of Davenport in Toronto named Sandra Souza, who's a young civil engineer. I think she is a software engineer. She's got a new baby. She was completely new to politics 15 months ago. And she is seeking the nomination for a major political party in that riding. You'd never guess which one. And you know, she's learned all of the other things. Like in an intersectional way, she's gone and talked to climate people and economic justice people and racial justice people and is connecting the dots through this initial experience of organizing. So we have some really promising fronts in the electoral space. There's a meeting on Thursday, since we're, you know, doing calls to action. There's a meeting on Thursday at 5 p.m. sponsored by the Palestine Solidarity Network around opportunities in the upcoming election. I didn't get the QR code to Alexis for the slide, but you can find it. IJV sent it out on the list recently. But there, you know, this movement that chose the electoral space is targeting the next election, and there's plenty of work to do. It has all kinds of limitations. One of the beautiful things about campaigning electorally is that nobody says you can't just acknowledge all of the limitations, the shittiness of it, the impoverished space that you're operating in, and yet you can build a political home on a campaign, and you can build a network and community power that lasts well after the next election and can re-merge back into social movements or can create a new kind of resistance to whatever happens after the election. And we know that we're going to have a lot more in common potentially with our comrades in the United States than we like. So I think there's a lot, it's about, again, it comes back to being real about the space in which you're operating, being real and honest and open about its limitations and its possibilities, and organizing very strategically within the potential of that front. And people who are drawn to that, great. People who are really contemptuous of it, no need, go, there's so many things to do, right? So you like self-select for the different kinds of work. And I'm excited about what happens in the next few months in Canada. Now, we're running pretty late, so we're gonna, as usual, it's the audience questions to get the short shrift, but there weren't that many. I mean, people, you were so well satisfied by the panel of the book. We are the panel of the book. I was telling Ruben earlier, this is the quintessential Jewish event. It's like all about a book. Everybody gets their own little section of the book. We read it to each other. We do commentary around it. We'll all arrive at the epilogue together and sign books and buy books and sell books and share books. But I will read a couple of quick questions for you two. How about a double-barreled question to wrap things up? Because it is sort of the two classic things. One is, and I'm just quoting from your cards, relatively legible even, thank you for that. So the first is, what are your thoughts on organizing with Jews who may feel a deep emotional connection to Israel and who are struggling to let in the realities of the occupation and genocide, and I would add apartheid system, and for whom the word anti-Zionist may be a barrier to connection? And the flip side of that question, I think, is this one. Rebecca, you mentioned that our impact as Jews doing this work is so important. And how can we better prevent that impact from being dampened by Zionist lobbyists who call our Jewishness or the Jewishness of our membership into question in an attempt to reduce the reach of our voice? So these are sort of the two fundamental questions facing Jewish anti-Zionist organizing, which is people who aren't there yet. How do we create home for people who aren't, who the framing of this event is awkward, is uncomfortable? And also the perennial problem of our Jewishness being constantly degraded and insulted and trampled on by people who claim the mantle of our community as if any community was a monolith. Strategy in the organizing space. Live organizing.
This gets back to the question about it not being comfortable is like, gets back to that organizing philosophy I shared before of meeting people where they are, but not leaving them there, right? So in an ideal world, and this is something that has matured during our tenure at JVP and that we're now seeing some of the fruits of now, is that in the US context, we do have a kind of thriving Jewish left movement ecosystem where we have multiple organizations that are Jewish anti-occupation broadly, anti-apartheid broadly, but that each kind of hit a different note, right? And so, because part of the thing is that I think Gita spoke to this too, of how like people have different skills, people have different passions, different entry points, different belief systems, and that we do need to create ways for people to come in where they can. And that, like that actually is important. But we also have to do it without compromising our principles, right? And our values. And that's hard, right? So what's been interesting for me is that I accidentally started an organization called Rabbis for Ceasefire, which means accidentally because I just organized a letter of rabbis to remind Jews that Judaism affirms life, like a kind of basic thing at the beginning of the ceasefire. And the genocide, not the ceasefire. The beginning of the genocide. And it just kept growing and growing, and now we're over 375 rabbis and rabbinical students and cantors, a kind of unprecedented rabbinic coalition that just kept growing. So I'm an organizer, so I had to keep following it. But it's a coalition, right? And the thing about a coalition is it's not a political home all the time, right? A coalition is a coalition, right? And so you can't what I've been stretching myself as an organizer in this time to do the thing that I know in my deepest self is the work I believe in, which is meeting these rabbis where they are, but not leaving them there, And it's hard because they have a lot of pressures, right? They're going to lose their jobs, but there's so much potential, right? If I'm able to get, for example, 20 these rabbis to do History of the Nakba adult education series in their synagogues, right? What could that do, right? The multiplication element of being able to do this kind of organizing. So I think the thing is there has to be different things for different people. We have to figure out how to let there be an ecosystem. And I think the left is kind of gives each other a hard time about that, because if you don't say it exactly a certain way, and which I understand, I also feel that way sometimes, but I also am but long-term change is going to require some amount of flexibility.
Yeah, the reason I asked Alissa to go first is because she's doing something that's new and different. And I think the story of what's happened with the two of us in the last 15 months is really, really interesting. We're dearest friends and comrades and political partners and have been for 15 years now. And as the genocide began, we kind of took somewhat different paths to what we could each emotionally and politically do during this time. So my own emotional reaction, and I'm not necessarily proud of this, but the experience that I've had in the last 15 months is that I have lost my patience. I have not found myself, I understand that my emotional bandwidth to have good persuasive conversations with people, which you need to do as an organizer, has just become limited. And if from my perspective, if you can't understand what you're seeing with your own eyes, that a genocide is happening, then no words that I say are going to change your mind. I think you said that too, Judah. And again, I'm not necessarily proud of that. I'm not saying that's the answer. I'm just saying it's my answer. It's my answer in this moment. And I've been slowly trying to get back around to being able to have those kinds of conversations. But right now, I both feel like I can't and I'm not good at them. And so I'm so thrilled and grateful that people like Alissa are having those conversations. And I'm going to organize Grand Central. I'm going to create the containers. And I'm going to help create the containers for the people who are already there. And I think the point of that is not that one is better than the other. It's just that, again, to that point of the ecosystem and the point of the different people can bring different skills and different emotions and different experiences and different strategies because of that. And they all add up to something bigger together. And so it's not a matter of saying you have to do it this way, you have to do it that way. It's a matter of being, again, really rigorous with yourself and being what am I capable of in this moment? And what can I do with that? And who are the other people I can do that with? And who are the other people I can be in conversation, partnership, and collaboration with so that it all adds up to something more. And I guess the last thing I'll say about the very big question, which I think is the fundamental question, which is how do we deal with the fact that there are other institutions that have way more power than us that try to tell us that we are not who we so fundamentally are. I'll just say that I think the thing that I feel so proud of about JVP is that all the work that we put in to build JVP in the years that the book covers, one of the things that came out of that is that people who have come out into the streets in these last 15 months for the first time or have suddenly become anti-Zionist or have suddenly been willing to say so, have somewhere to go. And you need to have somewhere to go in order to be able to stay there. And so I think the answer to the question, which is the answer to all the questions, is keep organizing and keep growing and keep doing the work.
Thank you. All right. Okay, here's where we are at in the program. That was the end of the panel section. We have one final thing to do together, but let us thank the most beautiful panel ever. Spectacular, all of you. Stephen, Gita, Beth, Alissa, Rebecca, thank you so much. Now, here's the thing. This room needs to be clear in a little over 10 minutes. We can do this. We're gonna do this together, okay? So in exchange for the last beautiful, perfect, delicious section of the program, you need to look me in the eye right now and promise me we're gonna get the hell out of here when Alexis is done. Yes? Do we have common agreement? No schmoozing, no coming to talk to Avi at the front. I'm gonna be out in the lobby, all right? And we're gonna get out of here together in an expeditious fashion. Are we agreed? Okay, because I got this note from an audience member, and it's about Alexis Kellum-Creer, who organized this event tonight. Says the audience member, I want to honor Alexis, not only for her vision, but also for her tireless, generous, open-hearted, brilliant, visionary hard work over the past months. Thank you, Alexis. This podium is now yours. Take us home.
Thank you, everyone. I want to, on behalf of IJV Vancouver, I want to thank our deepest thanks to Rabbi Alissa Wise, to Rebecca Vilkomerson for their extraordinary vision, for their commitment, and for the powerful seeds of solidarity and bridge building that you have planted here this evening. Thank you. To our wonderful panelists, Gita Musle, Beth Carlson-Malena, and Stephen Aberley, each of whom have been enacting solidarity in the struggle towards justice for Palestinians, for all peoples, and indeed for our planet for many years. Thank you. To Chief Rueben George for the space that you opened up for us, rooted in the resilience of your Tsleil-Waututh peoples. A crucial reminder that solidarity with Palestinians must encompass the intertwined struggles of all who are fighting oppression and working to dismantle colonialism. Community member Devin Davis has a beautiful offering to give to you. Chief Rueben, we just wanted to make sure that you have this before you left this evening. On behalf of all of us, thank you so much. Just give. Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Devin. To our extraordinary moderator, Avi Lewis, for handling a multi-directional discussion with compassion and a depth of insight that is evidence of Avi's lifelong interest in how human beings organize ourselves in right relationship with one another and with this precious land. You can learn more about Avi Lewis here. Thank you so much, Avi. I want to thank a tireless team of volunteers at IJV who helped plan every moment of this evening tonight and organize this event. I want to thank the wonderful and able staff at SFU, the Office of Community Engagement, and our terrific sponsors, IJV Vancouver, SFU, Morgan Center for Labor Research, Vancouver District Labor Council, Jewish Faculty Network of UBC, QP 2278, the wonderful Patricia Massey at Massey Books. Patricia is here downstairs, and she has copies of Ruben's book as well as Alissa and Rebecca's book. Haymarket Books, and tonight would not have been possible without our co-presenting sponsor, the Comparative Center for Muslim Studies. Under Adil Iskander, the CCMS at SFU does crucial work in our community to uplift, to enlighten, and to foster the understanding we all so urgently need as we work towards a just world where we are in right relationship with our lands and with one another. Thank you so much, Adil. And to everyone who is asking, what can I do to support Palestinian liberation? There are some slides that will follow that I have beautiful descriptions of, which I do not have time for. We will send you all of these slides with QR codes. These are your chances to donate to amazing projects like Dr. Adel Iskander's project on Palestine studies, to We Are Not Numbers, which is an amazing organization which all of the ticket proceeds from this evening will go to support. We have beautiful community members, Mohammed Alzaza and Omar, who are bringing their families to safety in Canada from Gaza. Please donate so that they can do that. And Jita spoke so beautifully about the Apartheid-Free Communities Pledge. Please go to this QR code and go to your local businesses, neighborhood associations, faith organizations, and get people to sign on. And finally, if you don't already have a copy of this amazing book, again, Patricia Massey is downstairs and there are copies being sold. There is $5 off the retail price for anyone. Well, all of you have tickets, so you will have $5 off the retail price. Thank you all so much for being here this evening. Get home safely and may we build a beautiful and a just world together. Thank you so much.